was a firefighter who rescued an elderly woman from a burning house, and when she sang a lullaby, his entire world stopped. Can you imagine saving someone's life, only to discover that this stranger holds the key to a mystery you've carried your entire life? This isn't just a story about heroism or rescue. It's a story about stolen identity, a mother's unbreakable love, and a truth that survived 40 years of lies and separation. This really happened in rural Oregon in 1972. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because what this firefighter discovered will prove that some bonds can never be broken, no matter how much time has passed or how far apart people are kept. What that elderly woman knew, and how a simple lullaby connected two souls across 4 decades of separation, will remind you that love leaves marks that time cannot erase. Tell me in the comments what state you're watching from, and whether you believe a parent and child can recognize each other after a lifetime apart. It was a cold October evening in 1972 when the call came into the Clackamas County Fire Station just outside Portland, Oregon. Structure fire, residential, elderly occupant possibly trapped inside. Firefighter James Mitchell, 32 years old, 6 years on the job, grabbed his gear and jumped on the truck with his crew. It was a routine call. They got dozens like it every month. But this one would change his life forever. James was a good firefighter. Dedicated, brave, skilled. He'd saved lives before, pulled people from burning buildings, given CPR to the dying, done all the heroic things firefighters do. But he'd never felt particularly heroic. To him, it was just the job. You saw someone in danger, you helped them. That's what you did. That's who he was. James had been raised by his aunt and uncle, Martha and Robert Mitchell, in a small town in eastern Oregon. They'd told him his parents died in a car accident when he was just 2 years old. He had no memories of them, no photographs. His aunt and uncle said the photos had been lost in a house fire years ago. All James had were the stories they told him. That his mother was kind, his father was strong, they'd loved him very much, and they died tragically, leaving him orphaned. James had accepted this story his whole life. He'd never had reason to question it. Martha and Robert had been good parents to him. Strict but loving. They'd given him a home, an education, a stable life. He'd grown up, joined the fire department, married a good woman named Susan, had 2 kids of his own. Life was good, normal. He wasn't looking for mysteries or missing pieces. But sometimes life finds you anyway. The truck arrived at the scene within 8 minutes. The house was a small, run-down bungalow on the outskirts of town, flames already visible through the windows, thick black smoke pouring out. Neighbors stood in the street, many in their night clothes, watching in horror. "There's someone inside," a neighbor shouted as James and his crew jumped off the truck. "Mrs. Whitmore." "She's in there!" "I saw her at the window." James didn't hesitate. He pulled on his breathing apparatus, checked his air, and headed for the front door. His captain, a veteran named Tom Rodriguez, grabbed his shoulder. "Mitchell, wait for backup. The structure looks unstable." "If she's in there, Captain, she doesn't have time to wait." Tom looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. 60 seconds. You're in and out in 60 seconds, or I'm sending the whole crew in after you." James kicked open the front door and entered hell. The heat was intense, the smoke so thick he couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. He stayed low, feeling his way through the house, calling out, "Fire department! Call out if you can hear me!" He heard it then, a weak voice coming from somewhere to his right. "Help, please. Help me." James followed the sound to a bedroom. The door was closed but not locked. He pushed it open and found her. An elderly woman, probably in her 70s, collapsed on the floor beside her bed, overcome by smoke. She was conscious but barely, coughing violently, her eyes streaming with tears. "I've got you, ma'am," James said, scooping her up. She weighed almost nothing, fragile as a bird. "I'm going to get you out of here." He retraced his steps, moving as fast as he could while carrying her. Behind him, he heard a crash as part of the ceiling collapsed into the room they'd just left. 30 seconds, he estimated. Maybe less before the whole structure came down. He burst out the front door just as the roof over the bedroom caved in with a roar of flames and falling timber. Tom and the other firefighters grabbed them, pulling them away from the house, getting the woman onto a gurney where paramedics immediately began administering oxygen. James pulled off his mask, coughing, his face covered in soot and sweat. That had been close. Too close. Another 30 seconds and they'd both be dead. "Nice work, Mitchell," Tom said, clapping him on the shoulder. That was cutting it fine, but you got her. James nodded, still catching his breath. He looked over at the elderly woman on the gurney. She'd regained some color, the oxygen helping. Her eyes were open, looking around with confusion and fear. And then her eyes landed on James. She stared at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Not fear or gratitude exactly. Something else. Something he couldn't name. Recognition. But that was impossible. He'd never seen this woman before in his life. The paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, and James watched them drive away, lights flashing, siren wailing. You know her? Tom asked. No, never seen her before. Why? The way she was looking at you. Like she knew you. James shrugged. Probably just shock. Disorientation from the smoke. But the look in her eyes stayed with him, haunted him through the rest of his shift. He couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Something beyond a routine rescue. 3 days later, James got a call at the station. It was a social worker from the hospital where they'd taken Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Mitchell, this is Carol Henderson from County Hospital. I'm calling about the elderly woman you rescued from the fire last week, Dorothy Whitmore. She's been asking to see you. She says it's very important. Is she all right? Physically, yes. She's recovering well. But she's quite agitated. She keeps saying she needs to speak with you. Would you be willing to come by the hospital? I know it's unusual, but she's quite insistent. James was curious despite himself. Sure. I can come by this afternoon when my shift ends. That afternoon, James drove to the hospital, still in his uniform, and was led to a shared room on the 3rd floor. Dorothy Whitmore was in the bed by the window, sitting up, looking far better than she had the night of the fire. She was small and thin, with white hair and blue eyes that were sharp and clear. The moment he walked in, those eyes locked onto him with the same intense stare from the night of the fire. You came, she said, her voice trembling. Thank you for coming. Of course, ma'am. How are you feeling? Better, thanks to you. You saved my life. She paused, studying his face with an unsettling intensity. What's your name? Your full name? James Mitchell. But everyone calls me Jim. James, she repeated softly. How old are you, James? 32. Why do you ask? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? James frowned. Ma'am, is there something specific you wanted to talk about? Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. Please, just answer me. Where were you born? I grew up in La Grande in eastern Oregon. But I don't know where I was born exactly. I was raised by my aunt and uncle. My parents died when I was very young. What were your parents' names? This was getting strange. I don't know. My aunt and uncle never talked about them much. They said it was too painful. Why are you asking me these questions? Dorothy reached out a shaking hand and grabbed his. Her grip was surprisingly strong. James, that night when you carried me out of the fire, when I was barely conscious, I heard you. I heard your voice, and I recognized it. That's impossible. We've never met. Not your adult voice. But the pattern of it, the cadence, the tone, it was like an echo of someone I used to know. And then when I saw your face, really saw it in the hospital, I knew. I've been looking at that face for 40 years. In my dreams, in my memories, every single day. James tried to pull his hand back, but she held firm. Ma'am, I think you're confused. The smoke inhalation. I'm not confused! Dorothy's voice was fierce now. I know my own son when I see him. Even after 40 years. Even though they told me you were dead. Even though they stole you from me and made me believe I'd lost you forever. I know you, James. Because you're my son. The room seemed to tilt. James sat down hard in the visitor's chair. That's not possible. My mother died in a car accident. When I was 2. That's what they told you, Dorothy said, tears streaming down her face now. But it's a lie. Your mother didn't die. I didn't die. I've been alive this whole time, searching for you, never giving up hope even when everyone said I was crazy, that I needed to let go and move on. But I couldn't, because a mother knows her child. And I knew somehow, someday I'd find you again. James stood up, backing away. This is crazy. You're mistaken. You're confused. Am I? Dorothy said. Then tell me, James, do you have any birthmarks? Any scars from when you were very young? James hesitated. He did have a birthmark. A distinctive one on his left shoulder blade, shaped almost like a star. His aunt had told him it was common, nothing special. I have a birthmark, so what? Lots of people have birthmarks. Describe it. It's on my left shoulder. Star-shaped. Why? Dorothy closed her eyes, and more tears leaked out. When you were born, the nurse told me you had a special mark. She called it an angel's kiss, star-shaped on your left shoulder blade. I used to trace it with my finger while you slept. I used to kiss it and tell you it meant you were destined for great things, that you'd shine bright in the world. Do you really think that's a coincidence? James felt his legs go weak. Anyone could guess a birthmark. This doesn't prove anything. You're right, Dorothy said. So let me tell you something only your mother would know. When you were a baby, you had trouble sleeping. You'd cry and nothing would soothe you, until I sang to you. There was one lullaby, in particular, that always worked. It was an old song my grandmother taught me, passed down through generations. I sang it to you every single night, and you'd calm down immediately. Listen to your mother's voice, find peace, and sleep. Dorothy began to sing. Her voice was thin and wavering with age and emotion, but the melody was clear and achingly beautiful. It was in a language James didn't recognize, maybe Gaelic or Welsh, something old and haunting. Codel, Moliamba Beg, Codel Gusokair, Mothas Gaid Fain. And James's world stopped. Because he knew that song. He'd always known that song. For as long as he could remember, that melody had lived somewhere deep in his mind. Sometimes he'd hum it without thinking, without knowing where it came from. He'd asked his aunt about it once as a child. She'd gotten angry, told him to stop making up nonsense that he'd probably heard it on the radio. But he hadn't heard it on the radio. He'd never heard anyone else sing it. Until now, how? James's voice came out as a whisper. How do you know that song? Dorothy opened her eyes, and in them James saw something that shook him to his core. Truth. Absolute, undeniable truth. Because I sang it to you every night for 2 years. Because it's your lullaby, James. The song your mother sang to her baby. To you. James sat back down, his hands shaking. Tell me everything. From the beginning, if you're really... He couldn't bring himself to say it. If you're who you say you are, tell me everything. And Dorothy did. She told him a story that seemed impossible, like something from a nightmare, but that rang with terrible truth. She'd been 19 years old in 1940, living in Portland, working as a seamstress. She'd fallen in love with a young man named Robert Whitmore. They'd married quickly, as young couples did in those days, and she'd gotten pregnant almost immediately. James had been born in January 1941, a healthy, beautiful baby boy. Dorothy had named him James after her father. For 2 years, they'd been happy. A small family, not much money, but filled with love. Robert worked at the docks. Dorothy took in sewing work from home so she could stay with the baby. They had dreams, plans for the future. Then in December 1942, Robert was drafted. World War II was raging, and young men were being called up left and right. Robert shipped out in January 1943, heading for Europe. He promised Dorothy he'd come back, that they'd build a good life together, raise their son, grow old together. Robert Whitmore died in the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. Dorothy received the telegram on Christmas Eve. Her husband was gone, and she was alone with a 4-year-old son, no family support, and barely any money. I tried to make it work, Dorothy said, her voice breaking. I worked as much as I could. I took in more sewing, worked at a factory during the day, sometimes cleaned houses at night. But it wasn't enough. I could barely feed us. We were evicted from our apartment. I was desperate, lost. I didn't know what to do. And then they came. A woman from some kind of charitable organization. She said she could help, that there were families who wanted to adopt children, who could give them good homes, opportunities I could never provide. She said it would be temporary, that I could sign papers giving someone else custody just until I got back on my feet. And then when I was stable again, I could get you back. Dorothy's hands clenched into fists. I was so stupid, so desperate. I believed her. I signed papers I didn't fully read. I let them take you for what I thought would be a few months. You were 5 years old. You cried and begged me not to send you away, but I told you it would be okay. That mama would come get you soon. I told you to be brave, to remember me, to remember our song. She started to cry harder now, her whole body shaking. 3 months later, I had a job. A real job with decent pay. I'd found a small apartment. I went to the organization to get you back, and they told me you were gone, permanently adopted. They said I'd signed away all my parental rights, that the adoption was legal and binding, that I'd never see you again. I fought them. I went to lawyers, but I couldn't afford anyone good. The lawyers I could afford told me I had no case. The papers I'd signed were ironclad. I'd given you away legally. There was nothing I could do. I tried to find out who had adopted you, where you were, but they wouldn't tell me. They said it was confidential. That it was better for everyone if I just moved on, forgot about you, started over. Dorothy looked directly into James's eyes. But how could I forget my own child? How could I move on when my heart was walking around somewhere in the world without me? I searched for years. I hired private investigators when I could scrape together the money. I put ads in newspapers. I never stopped looking, but I never found you. It was like you'd vanished. And then, 3 days ago, you walked into my burning house. You carried me out. You saved my life. And when I saw your face, I knew. I knew it was you, my James, my baby boy, all grown up, a hero, a firefighter who saves people's lives. And I thought maybe God was giving me a second chance. Maybe after all these years I'd finally found you. James sat in stunned silence. His mind was reeling. Could this possibly be true? Could his entire life, everything he'd been told, be a lie? My aunt and uncle, he finally said. Martha and Robert Mitchell. Are those the people who adopted me? I don't know their names, Dorothy said. The adoption was closed, sealed. I was never told who took you. But James, you need to understand. These adoptions weren't always honest. There were organizations back then that convinced desperate mothers to give up their children, and then they'd turn around and sell those children to wealthy families who wanted to adopt. It was legal on paper, but morally, it was trafficking. Stealing babies from poor mothers and giving them to rich families. That's a serious accusation, James said, but his voice lacked conviction. Because even as he said it, he was remembering things. Strange things from his childhood that had never quite made sense. How his aunt would get nervous when anyone asked about his parents. How they'd moved several times when he was young, always to different towns, as if they were running from something. How there were no baby photos of him, no birth certificate that he'd ever seen, no baptism records. His aunt had always said they'd been lost in that fire, but he'd never actually seen evidence of any fire. How sometimes, late at night when she thought he was asleep, he'd hear his aunt crying and saying things like, "We had no choice and God forgive us." He'd thought she was mourning his parents. But what if she was mourning something else? Her own guilt. I need to talk to my aunt, James said. She's still alive. She's in a nursing home in La Grande. I need to ask her about this. Will you come back? Dorothy asked, her voice pleading. After you talk to her, will you come back and tell me what you find out? James looked at this woman who claimed to be his mother. He saw the hope in her eyes, the desperate love, the 40 years of grief and searching. And something in his heart, some deep, primal instinct, believed her. Yes, he said. I'll come back. That weekend, James drove the 4 hours to La Grande, his mind churning the entire way. He told his wife Susan everything. She'd been shocked but supportive. You need to find out the truth, she'd said. For your sake. For our kids' sake. They deserve to know where they really come from. Martha Mitchell was 83 years old now, in failing health, living in the Sunrise Senior Care Facility. James signed in at the front desk and was directed to her room. She was in a wheelchair by the window, staring out at the parking lot, a blanket over her lap. She looked small and frail, nothing like the formidable woman who'd raised him. Aunt Martha, James said gently. She turned and her face lit up. James, what a wonderful surprise. I didn't know you were coming. I needed to talk to you about something important. He pulled a chair over and sat facing her. Aunt Martha, I need you to tell me the truth about my parents, about where I really came from. The light in her eyes dimmed. She looked away. I've told you, dear. Your parents died when you were small, in a car accident. That's not true, is it? James's voice was gentle but firm. A woman told me a different story. A woman who says she's my real mother. A woman who says I was taken from her when I was 5 years old. Is that true, Aunt Martha? Martha's hand started to shake. Her face crumpled. Oh, James. Oh, my boy. I always knew this day might come. I prayed it wouldn't, but I knew. I knew someday you'd find out. So it's true, James said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me, please. I need to hear it from you. Martha started to cry, tears running down her weathered cheeks. Your Uncle Robert and I, we couldn't have children. We tried for 15 years. We wanted a baby so desperately. We prayed and prayed, and nothing. Back then, adoption was difficult, especially if you didn't have much money. and we didn't. Then a woman approached us. She worked for an organization that placed children with families. She said there was a boy, 5 years old, whose mother couldn't care for him. She said the mother was destitute, couldn't feed him properly, that he'd have a much better life with us. She showed us a picture of you. Such a beautiful child. Big eyes, sweet smile, and we fell in love with you before we even met you. The woman said the adoption could be arranged quickly, quietly, that the mother had already signed papers. But it would cost money, more money than we had. We took out loans, borrowed from friends, sold almost everything we owned. And we bought you, James. We bought you like you were property. I've carried that shame every day of my life. James felt sick. Did you know? Did you know that my mother didn't really want to give me up? That she was deceived? Martha's crying intensified. We didn't know at first. We believed what they told us, that your mother was unfit, that she'd willingly given you up. But then, a few months after we got you, a woman came to our house. A young woman, desperate and crying. She said she was your mother, that you'd been stolen from her, that she wanted you back. What did you do? James asked, though he dreaded the answer. Robert sent her away. He threatened to call the police if she came back. He said we had legal papers, that we'd done everything legally, that she had no claim to you anymore. She begged. She said she'd go to the authorities, to the newspapers. Robert told her if she made trouble, we'd disappear with you and she'd never find you. We'd make sure of it. Martha looked up at James with anguished eyes. And we did. We moved. We changed our address. We made sure there was no trail she could follow. We kept you from your mother, James. We knew she was out there, searching, grieving. And we kept you anyway because we loved you, because we couldn't bear to lose you. You stole my life, James said, his voice shaking with anger and grief. You stole my mother's life. 40 years, Aunt Martha. 40 years she's been searching for me. 40 years I've believed a lie. How could you do that? Because we loved you, Martha cried. Because you were the answer to our prayers. Because we raised you, cared for you, gave you everything we had. Doesn't that count for something? Doesn't that make us your real parents? No, James said, standing up. It makes you kidnappers. It makes you thieves. You stole someone's child and built your happiness on her grief. He walked to the door, then turned back. Her name is Dorothy. Dorothy Whitmore. In case you ever wondered. In case you ever cared about the woman whose life you destroyed. He left his aunt sobbing in her wheelchair and drove back to Portland with tears streaming down his own face. He'd lost everything he thought he knew. His past was a lie. His identity was a lie. The people he'd called mother and father were criminals. But he'd also gained something. The truth. And a mother who'd never stopped loving him, never stopped searching, never stopped hoping. James went back to the hospital the next day. Dorothy was being discharged, going to stay with a neighbor until her house could be rebuilt. When she saw James walk into her room, her face transformed with hope and fear. You came back. I talked to my aunt, Martha Mitchell. She told me everything. You were right. About all of it. She and her husband, they took me from you. They knew you were searching, and they hid me anyway. Dorothy made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Then you believe me? You believe I'm your mother? James sat on the edge of her hospital bed. Up close he could see himself in her face, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her mouth. How had he not seen it before? I believe you. I don't know how, but I think I've always known, somewhere deep down, that something wasn't right about my past. And when you sang that lullaby, I knew. Because I've carried that song my whole life and I never knew where it came from. Oh, my boy. Dorothy reached out and touched his face, her hand trembling. My beautiful boy. I've dreamed of this moment for 40 years. I thought I'd die without ever seeing you again. I'm sorry, James said, his own tears falling. I'm so sorry for all the years we lost, for what they did to you, for what they did to us. It wasn't your fault. You were a child. They lied to both of us. She pulled him into a hug, and James let himself be held by this woman who was a stranger, but also somehow the most familiar person in the world. He breathed in her scent and felt something click into place. Something that had always been missing, but that he hadn't known how to name. Over the following weeks and months, James and Dorothy rebuilt their relationship. It was strange and sometimes painful. He was a grown man with his own family. She was an elderly woman who'd lived a lifetime alone. They'd missed everything: his first day of school, his graduation, his wedding, the birth of his children. All the moments that make up a life they'd experienced separately, stolen from each other by people who'd claimed to love him. But they had now. and they were determined to make the most of it. Dorothy met Susan and the grandchildren she'd never known she had. Susan, a kind and generous woman, welcomed Dorothy with open arms. "James's mother is my mother now too," she told Dorothy. "Your family." The children, initially confused, quickly grew to love their newfound grandmother. She taught them the old lullaby, the one she'd sung to James. She told them stories about their grandfather Robert, the young soldier who'd died in the war. She gave them the connection to their past that had been stolen from them. James tried to pursue legal action against the organization that had facilitated his adoption, but it had closed decades ago, its records destroyed or lost. The people involved were long dead. There was no one left to hold accountable. The law couldn't give them back the lost years. So James did the next best thing. He went public with their story. He did interviews with newspapers, television stations. He told the truth about illegal adoptions, about how children were stolen from poor mothers and sold to wealthy families, about how the trauma of separation lasted generations. The story resonated. Other people came forward with similar experiences. A national conversation began about adoption ethics, about the rights of birth parents, about the need for openness and honesty in the system. James and Dorothy became advocates, working with legislators to reform adoption laws, to create better oversight, to ensure that what happened to them couldn't happen to others. They couldn't get back their lost years, but they could try to protect future families from the same fate. As for Martha and Robert Mitchell, Robert had died years before. Martha lived another 2 years after James's confrontation with her, consumed by guilt and grief. She died in 1974 without James ever speaking to her again. He attended her funeral because Susan convinced him it was the right thing to do, but he didn't mourn her. He mourned the lie she'd forced him to live. He mourned the mother she'd stolen from him. But he couldn't mourn her. Dorothy lived another 18 years after their reunion. Beautiful, precious years. She got to know her son, watch her grandchildren grow, attend school plays and baseball games and piano recitals. All the ordinary moments of family life that are actually the most extraordinary things in the world. She lived long enough to see her grandson become a firefighter, just like his father. The day Daniel Mitchell graduated from the fire academy, Dorothy sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face. "It's like poetry," she told James. "You saved me from a fire, and now your son will save others." Life has a way of coming full circle. When Dorothy died in 1990 at age 89, James held her hand. Her last words to him were, "Sing our song." So he did. He sang the lullaby she'd taught him when he was a baby, the song that had lived in his heart for 40 years without him knowing why. He sang it as she took her last breath, and he felt her squeeze his hand one final time before she was gone. Codale, Codale, Mo Liamba Big. They buried Dorothy next to Robert, her first love, the husband who'd died in the war. James made sure the headstone told her true story. Dorothy Whitmore Mitchell, 1921-1990. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She never stopped searching. She never stopped loving. She never gave up. And underneath he had them carve the first line of the lullaby in its original Gaelic. Codale, Codale, Molian Babig. Sleep, sleep, my little child. James is 73 years old now. He retired from the fire department years ago, but he still volunteers with adoption advocacy groups. He tells his story to anyone who will listen. He's helped reunite other families separated by unethical adoptions. He's consulted on legislation to open sealed adoption records so adoptees can find their birth families if they choose. His life's work has become honoring his mother's memory by making sure her suffering wasn't in vain. She could have been bitter, James often says when he speaks at conferences or support groups. She could have given up. She could have moved on, remarried, had other children, forgotten about me. Everyone told her to, but she didn't. She held on to hope for 40 years. She kept searching even when it seemed hopeless. And because she never gave up, we got 18 years together. 18 years we weren't supposed to have. 18 years that changed my life and my children's lives. That's the power of a mother's love. It doesn't give up. It doesn't quit. It survives lies and distance and decades of separation. It survives everything. And the lullaby? James still sings it. He sang it to his children. He's singing it now to his grandchildren. The melody that his mother sang to him when he was a baby, that lived in his subconscious for 40 years, that connected them across the silence and separation, continues. It's a living thread linking generations, proving that some bonds truly cannot be broken. Dorothy always said that music was magic, that a song could hold love the way a box holds treasure, keeping it safe even through the worst storms. She was right. That lullaby held her love for her son through 40 years of forced separation. And when he heard it again, sung by an elderly woman he'd just rescued from a fire, it opened a door that everyone had thought was sealed forever. This story teaches us several profound truths. First, that a mother's love is unbreakable. 40 years of separation, a lifetime of being told to move on, society's judgment for not letting go, none of it could diminish Dorothy's love for her son or her determination to find him. She never stopped being his mother, even when the world told her she'd lost that right. Second, that truth has a way of surviving. James lived 32 years believing a lie. But the truth was always there, buried in his subconscious, living in that lullaby he couldn't explain. And when the moment was right, when he saved his mother's life and heard her sing, the truth emerged. You can suppress truth, bury it, build lies around it, but you can never fully kill it. Third, that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us most deeply. Martha and Robert Mitchell claimed to love James, and in their way, perhaps they did. But their love was selfish. It was built on stolen goods, on another woman's grief, on a child's stolen identity. Real love doesn't require lies. Real love doesn't build happiness on someone else's suffering. They justified their actions by saying they gave James a good home, a good life, and maybe they did. But they also robbed him of his mother, his identity, his truth. No amount of material comfort can compensate for that. Fourth, that it's never too late to make things right. James and Dorothy got 18 years together. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough to make up for the 40 years they'd lost. But it was something. It was precious. It was a gift neither of them thought they'd get. They didn't waste it on anger or regret. They used it to build new memories, to know each other, to be family. 18 years of Sunday dinners and holidays and ordinary moments that were actually miracles. And finally, that we all carry our origins with us, whether we know it or not. James carried his mother's lullaby for 40 years without knowing where it came from. It was encoded in him, part of his very being. We carry our parents, our ancestors, our origins within us, in our gestures, our preferences, our instincts, in the songs we hum without knowing why. Dorothy used to tell James, "They could take you away from me, but they couldn't take you out of you. You were always my son, even when you didn't know it. The truth of who you are, where you come from, it lives in your bones." They couldn't steal that. She was right. The truth lived in him, and when the time was right, that truth came home. So I ask you now, what truths are you carrying that you don't fully understand? What songs do you hum? What habits do you have? What instincts do you follow without knowing their origin? Maybe you're adopted and wondering about your birth family. Maybe you're a parent separated from a child. Maybe you're someone who's always felt like something was missing, like a piece of your story hasn't been told. Listen to your heart. Pay attention to those moments when something resonates in a way you can't explain. That might be truth trying to surface. That might be your own lullaby, calling you home. And if you're someone who knows a truth that others don't know, a truth that could reunite families or restore identities, tell it. Don't keep secrets that hurt people. Don't protect lies just because revealing them would be uncomfortable. The truth deserves to be told. People deserve to know who they are, where they come from, who loved them. Be the person who opens doors instead of keeping them closed. Be the person who sings the lullaby that brings someone home. James Mitchell rescued an elderly woman from a fire because that's what firefighters do. They save lives without expecting anything in return. But in saving Dorothy Whitmore, he saved himself. He rescued his own past, his own identity, his own truth from the flames of lies that had consumed his history. And that elderly woman, that frail survivor, gave him back the most precious thing that had been stolen from him: his mother, his name, his song. Today, James and his family maintain Dorothy's house, which was rebuilt after the fire. They turned it into a small museum and resource center for adoption reunion services. On the wall, there's a large photograph of Dorothy as a young mother holding baby James, one of the few photos that survived from before his abduction. Next to it is a photo from 1972 of James and Dorothy on the day they were reunited, both crying, holding each other as if they'd never let go. And every year on October 15th, the anniversary of the fire that brought them back together, The family gathers at that house. They sing the lullaby together, all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who exist because Dorothy never gave up. Because James had the courage to accept the truth. Because a song survived when everything else was lost. Cordale, molen bibi, Cordale gusokir, motasgeid fein, tamisa fuirach fesgort. Bid tu subhailte, bid tu bleth. Sleep, sleep, my little child. Sleep peacefully, my own treasure. I'm staying close to you. You will be safe. You will be warm. The children's voices rise together in the old language, keeping alive a tradition that almost died, preserving a love that refused to be silenced. Neighbors sometimes stop by when they hear the singing, drawn by the beautiful, haunting melody. And James tells them the story. Every time he tells the story, because stories like this need to be told. They need to be remembered. They need to inspire others to search for their own truths, to fight for their own reunions, to never give up on love. The fire department where James worked created a scholarship in Dorothy's name for children of firefighters. She taught us, Fire Captain Tom Rodriguez said at the dedication ceremony, that the most important rescues aren't always dramatic. Sometimes the real rescue happens quietly in a hospital room when someone has the courage to tell the truth. James Mitchell rescued Dorothy from a fire, but Dorothy rescued James from a lifetime of not knowing who he really was. That's a different kind of heroism, but it's heroism nonetheless. The adoption advocacy organization that James and Dorothy founded together, Never Stop Searching, has helped reunite over 300 families in the years since Dorothy's death. They specialize in cases involving unethical or forced adoptions from the 1930s through 1970s, that dark period when poor mothers, unmarried mothers, and mothers deemed unfit by society's standards were routinely pressured or deceived into giving up their children. Each reunion is different. Some are joyful. Some are complicated by anger, grief, decades of separate lives. Not every birth parent wants to be found. Not every adoptee wants to search. But the organization's philosophy, Dorothy's philosophy, is that people deserve the truth. They deserve to know where they came from, even if they choose not to pursue a relationship. Identity is a right, not a privilege. One of the families they helped reunite was particularly moving. A woman in her 60s named Patricia had been searching for her daughter, given up for adoption in 1952, for 40 years. The daughter, now a middle-aged woman named Karen, had also been searching for her birth mother. They'd missed each other by days, by miles, by the smallest margins for decades. The organization brought them together in 2005. At their reunion, Patricia sang to Karen. It was a lullaby, different from Dorothy's, but just as old, just as precious. And Karen, who'd never heard that song before in her conscious memory, burst into tears. "I know that song," she sobbed. "I've hummed it my whole life. I never knew why. I thought I made it up." She hadn't made it up. She'd remembered it, carried it. The way we carry our mothers in our bones, in our blood, in the songs we sing without knowing their source. James was there that day. He watched Patricia and Karen hold each other and cry and sing together. And he thought of his own mother, gone now for 15 years, but still present in every note of the lullaby he sang to his grandchildren. "This is Mom's legacy," he told Susan that night. "Every family we reunite, every truth we uncover, every person who finally learns who they are, this is her life's work." Continuing. The story of James and Dorothy has been featured in books, documentaries, and news programs. It's been used in ethics classes to discuss adoption practices. It's been cited in legal briefs arguing for opening sealed adoption records. It's become larger than two people, larger than one family. It's become a symbol of hope for everyone who's ever been separated from someone they love, for everyone who's ever felt like a piece of their identity was missing. But beyond all the advocacy work, beyond the policy changes and the families reunited, the story remains deeply personal. It's about a boy who became a man without knowing who his mother was. It's about a woman who became elderly while never stopping her search for her son. It's about the miracle of a house fire, of all things, being the instrument that brought them back together. It's about a song that survived 40 years of silence. James often reflects on the strange chain of events that led to his reunion with Dorothy. If he hadn't become a firefighter, if he'd been on a different shift that night, if Dorothy had escaped the fire on her own, if she hadn't asked to see him afterward, if she hadn't had the courage to tell him the truth, if he hadn't had the courage to believe her, any one of those things being different, and he might have lived his whole life not knowing. He might have died believing Martha and Robert Mitchell were his parents, never knowing his real mother had spent a lifetime searching for him. But that's not what happened, James says. What happened was a series of small miracles. Mom's house caught fire at the exact moment I was on duty. I was the one who pulled her out. She recognized something in me that I didn't recognize in myself. And she had the courage to speak up, even knowing I might reject her, might think she was crazy. All of those things had to happen exactly as they did. And they did. Call it fate, call it God, call it the universe looking out for us. I don't know what to call it, but I'm grateful for it every single day. Dorothy used to say that the fire was both the worst and best thing that ever happened to her. The worst because she lost her home, the small house where she'd lived alone for decades, surrounded by memories and the few possessions that mattered to her. But the best because it brought her son back. I would burn down 1,000 houses, she told a reporter once, if it meant finding my boy. Material things can be replaced, but my son? He's irreplaceable. And I got him back. After 40 years of believing I never would, I got him back. The reporter had asked her if she was angry at the Mitchells, if she hated them for what they'd done. Dorothy had thought about it for a long moment before answering. I don't have room in my heart for hate, she'd said. I spent 40 years with a hole in my heart where my son should have been. Now that hole is filled, there's no space left for anger or bitterness. Do I wish things had been different? Of course. Do I wish I'd raised my son? Been there for all the moments I missed. Every day, but I can't change the past. All I can do is cherish the present, and that's what I choose to do. That forgiveness, that grace, impressed everyone who knew Dorothy. She had every reason to be bitter. She'd been betrayed, lied to, robbed of decades with her child. But she chose love over anger, gratitude over resentment, the time she had with James over the time that had been stolen. That choice, that decision to focus on the gift rather than the theft, defined her final years and left a powerful example for her family. James has tried to embody that same grace. He doesn't spend energy hating the Mitchells. They're dead and his hatred wouldn't change anything. Instead, he focuses on the positive, on the 18 years he had with his mother, on the family they built together, on the work they did to help others, on the legacy of love and perseverance that Dorothy left behind. Mom taught me, James says, that you can't let the people who hurt you steal your present by making you live in anger about the past. What the Mitchells did was wrong, deeply wrong, but I won't let their wrong actions define my life. I define my life by what I choose to do now. And I choose to honor my mother by living fully, loving deeply, and fighting for truth and justice for others. This philosophy has shaped how James raised his own children and how he's now guiding his grandchildren. He's taught them the importance of truth, of knowing where you come from, of honoring your ancestors. But he's also taught them about forgiveness, about moving forward, about not letting past hurts poison your present joy. It's a delicate balance, acknowledging pain while not being consumed by it. Dorothy modeled it perfectly, and James has tried to follow her example. The fire that brought James and Dorothy back together destroyed her house, but forged an unbreakable bond between them. In the 18 years they had together after the reunion, they never took a single day for granted. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday afternoon visit was precious. They knew how easily they might have missed each other, how close they came to living their entire lives apart. So they cherished every moment, made the most of every hour, stored up memories to last a lifetime. When Dorothy was dying, when she knew her time was short, she told James something that has stayed with him ever since. I want you to know, she said, her voice weak but clear, that finding you again, getting to know you, meeting your beautiful family, these past 18 years have been the happiest of my life. Happier even than when you were a baby, because now I can appreciate it fully. Now I understand how precious it is. The first time I had you, I was young and overwhelmed, and I took it for granted that you'd always be there. This time I knew better. This time I treasured every single second. She'd paused, catching her breath, and then continued. So even though we lost 40 years, even though there's so much pain in our story, I want you to know I'm grateful. Grateful that I got to find you. Grateful for every moment we've had. Grateful that my life, which felt incomplete for so long, got to be whole again before the end. Not everyone gets that. Not everyone who loses someone gets to find them again. But I did, we did, and that's a miracle I thank God for every single day. James tells this story through tears every time. It's been over 30 years since his mother died, and it still moves him deeply. Because she was right. They were blessed. In the midst of tragedy and loss and stolen years, they were blessed with reunion, with 18 years of wholeness, with the miracle of finding each other again against impossible odds. That lullaby, that simple song Dorothy sang to her baby 70 years ago, became the thread that pulled them back together across decades of silence and separation. It survived when everything else was lost. It endured when all hope seemed gone. And when James heard it again, sung by the woman he'd just rescued from flames, it opened a door that everyone believed was permanently closed. Music is memory, they say. Music bypasses the conscious mind and speaks directly to the deepest parts of us. That's why Alzheimer's patients who can't remember their own names can still sing songs from their childhood. That's why a certain melody can transport us instantly back to a specific moment, a specific feeling, a specific person. Music lives in a place beyond words, beyond time, beyond forgetting. Dorothy understood that. That's why she chose a lullaby as the gift she gave her son. Not words which can be forgotten, not objects which can be lost, but a melody which lives in the soul and can never be truly erased. Even when James didn't know who he was or where he came from, he carried that lullaby. It was proof that he'd been loved, evidence that he'd had a mother who sang to him, who held him, who cherished him. And when the time was right, when the universe aligned and brought them back together, that song was the key that unlocked everything. Now, that song lives on. James's grandchildren sing it to their dolls, their pets, their younger siblings. They don't always know the Gaelic words, but they know the melody. They know it's important, that it means something, that it connects them to a great-grandmother they never met, but who loved them through loving their father, through never giving up, through keeping hope alive even when hope seemed foolish. One of James's granddaughters, also named Dorothy after her great-grandmother, is studying music in college. She's researching traditional lullabies for her senior thesis. She's tracing the history of Codale Codale Mo Liamh Big, trying to find its origins, document its variations, understand its cultural context. It's not just our family song, she explained to James. It's part of a bigger tradition. Great-grandma was passing down something that had been passed down to her and to her grandmother before her. It's hundreds of years old, maybe thousands, and it survived wars and famines and immigration and separation. Our story is just one chapter in a much longer story of people using music to hold on to what matters most. James had never thought of it that way. His mother's lullaby is part of an ancient tradition of human beings using song to soothe children, to preserve culture, to maintain connection across distances and generations. It made their personal story feel even more significant, part of something larger and more enduring. Dorothy would have loved that interpretation. She would have loved knowing that her great-granddaughter was studying the song, honoring it, ensuring it would continue for future generations. She would have loved seeing how that one melody she sang to her baby boy in 1941 had become a living legacy, a thread of love stretching across time. The organization James and Dorothy founded continues its work. They've expanded beyond adoption reunions to help with all kinds of family separations. Children taken by the foster system and never returned. Siblings separated in childhood and searching for each other decades later. Indigenous children stolen through forced assimilation programs. Families separated by war, by immigration, by natural disasters. Anyone searching for lost family members can turn to Never Stop Searching for help. The organization's motto, chosen by Dorothy herself, is simple: love never forgets. And their logo is a musical note intertwined with a heart, representing the power of songs and memory to maintain bonds across any separation. Every year, on the anniversary of Dorothy's death, the organization holds a remembrance ceremony where families who've been reunited share their stories. They light candles, they sing songs, they celebrate the power of perseverance and hope, and they always end with Dorothy's lullaby. Everyone singing together in that ancient Gaelic, keeping alive a tradition of love that refuses to die. James is old now. His own grandchildren are having children. He's a great-grandfather, something he never imagined when he was a young firefighter pulling an elderly woman from a burning house 50 years ago. His hair is white. His hands shake slightly. He moves slowly, carefully. But his mind is sharp and his memory is long. He remembers everything about that night in 1972, the smell of smoke, the heat of the flames, the lightness of his mother's body as he carried her to safety. The way she looked at him, even then, with a recognition he didn't understand. And he will remember until his dying day, the moment she sang. The moment that Lullaby, carried in his subconscious for 32 years, came alive again in his mother's voice. The moment everything changed. The moment he came home. His own health is failing now. His heart, the doctors say, weakened by years of running into burning buildings, breathing smoke, pushing his body to its limits to save others. It's the price firefighters pay. But James has no regrets. He saved lives. He made a difference. And in the process of saving his mother's life, he saved his own. Found himself. Became whole. That's worth any price. His family knows his time is short. They're gathering, coming from across the country to be with him. And they've planned something special for his final days. They're going to sing, all of them together, the lullaby that connects them all, that makes them who they are, the song that brought their grandfather home and that will send him off with love. Kodale, Kodale, Moliambabig. James lies in bed, his breathing labored, his body weak. But when his family begins to sing, his eyes open. He smiles, and with his last bit of strength he joins in. His voice is thin and wavering, but the melody is perfect. He sung this song thousands of times, to himself as a child when he didn't know why it comforted him, to his children when they were babies, to his grandchildren at bedtime. And now, as his life comes full circle, he sings it one more time. His youngest great-granddaughter, just 3 years old, is sitting on the bed next to him. She takes his hand, leans close, and sings directly to him in her sweet, pure child's voice. And James feels it, the presence of his mother, gone for over 30 years but alive in this moment, in this song, in this child who carries her name and her melody forward. He feels Dorothy's love surrounding him, welcoming him, telling him it's okay to let go, that she's waiting for him on the other side. Sleep, sleep, my little child. You will be safe. You will be warm. James takes his last breath while his family sings, and in that breath, in that moment, there is no separation. Only love, only connection, only the eternal truth that some bonds can never be broken, that some songs never end, that love is stronger than death, than lies, than time itself. The firefighter who rescued an old woman from a fire 50 years ago and discovered she was his mother has come home. Not to the house where he grew up, which was built on lies. Not to the place where he lived his adult life, though he loved it well. But home to his mother, to his origins, to the first voice he ever heard, and the last sound that will echo in his ears as he leaves this world. His family continues singing as he passes, their voices strong and sure, carrying him on waves of love and memory. And somewhere, in whatever comes next, Dorothy is singing too, reunited with her son at last, forever, the way it should have been all along. Kodale, Kodale, Moliambaf Big. Sleep, sleep, my little child. You are home now. You are safe. You are loved. And you always, always were.